A gunshot crack of breaking glass rang out in the hallway, sharp enough to freeze every breath inside the worn-down duplex on Sycamore Street. Brian Walker jerked upright at the kitchen table, heart slamming hard, a cold jolt running up his spine. Then the truth settled. It wasn't a gunshot. It was the sound of the old heating pipe giving out again, rattling like a warning from a house that had survived too many winters. Still, the moment of terror lingered in his chest. In this neighborhood, you didn't dismiss sounds like that too quickly. Lily stirred on the living room couch, pulling her blanket tighter around her small frame. Brian watched her for a moment, fighting the urge to go over and check if she was still breathing. He did that more often lately. Too often. He forced himself to look back at the laptop screen in front of him, the glow highlighting the lines under his eyes. A rejection email sat open the words, pressing down on him like a weight he couldn't shake. "We appreciate your interest, but..." He exhaled slow and tight. Another door closed. Another reminder he wasn't the kind of man the world was waiting for. He rubbed his forehead, trying to push back the exhaustion. The house was quiet, except for the tick of the old wall clock and the soft hum of traffic drifting in from the main road. Outside the frosted window, the streetlights cast their amber glow on snow-washed pavement. Lancaster nights in late January always looked peaceful, from a distance the kind of scene people painted on Christmas cards. Up close, it was different. Up close, the peace felt brittle. He stood and poured the last of the cheap drip coffee into his mug. It tasted burnt metallic, but it kept him awake. Tomorrow he had the interview in Philadelphia, Sterling and Grant Analytics. A real firm. A real chance. But also a place that wouldn't care that he'd spent years teaching himself late at night while Lily slept. They cared about degrees, titles. People who didn't flinch when someone looked them in the eye. People who didn't show up wearing thrift store jackets and hope. He shut his eyes. Don't think. Just move. He went to check on Lily. Her breathing was steady, small puffs of warm air against the blanket. He pushed away a strand of hair stuck to her cheek. She looked so much like Amanda. In sleep it hurt. He whispered, "I'll figure it out, baby girl." Half a promise, half a prayer, more hope than truth. On the counter beside his keys lay the notice from the landlord, a firm reminder that rent would not wait for miracles. He folded it and tucked it under a stack of mail. Out of sight, but never out of mind. The morning came too fast. He hadn't slept, but he'd learned how to fake the appearance of rest. As dawn crept into the kitchen, the air crisp and thin, he buttoned the blazer he'd borrowed from Marcus, the neighbor across the hall. Marcus insisted it still fit him. It didn't, not really. The shoulders were a hair too wide, and the cuffs frayed, but it was better than nothing. Lily blinked awake at the kitchen table, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, are you going somewhere fancy?" Brian forced a smile. "Something like that. Will you be back before Mrs. Patterson brings the cookies?" He hesitated a second too long. "I'll try." Her head tilted in that way that always reminded him she understood more than she should at her age. She didn't question him. That was worse somehow. By 8:30, he was on the road. The Greyhound bus rumbled toward Philadelphia as the city skyline slowly rose from the horizon, like a cold steel promise. His breath fogged the window as he watched neighborhoods blur past. A thin unease crawled beneath his ribs. He wasn't afraid of interviews. He was afraid of being seen, really seen, and dismissed. The Sterling and Grant building loomed like a polished monument when he arrived. Glass panels reflecting the pale winter sun, clean lines, sharp edges. Everything about it felt deliberate, efficient, untouchable. He paused at the entrance, catching his reflection in the revolving door. The blazer looked older in daylight. His shoes carried the marker of years on warehouse floors. His face, unshaven in the shadowed creases, looked like someone who had run out of excuses, but kept moving anyway. He stepped inside. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold air. People in well-cut coats moved with purpose, their heels clicking on marble. A receptionist, with perfect posture, greeted him without warmth. Her eyes flicked to his shoes before she pointed him toward the elevators. On the ride up, Brian stood between two men in suits, discussing a merger worth $7-point-something million as casually as if they were talking football scores. He kept his gaze low. Didn't want to draw attention, but he could feel it anyway. The unspoken question, who let this man in? When the elevator opened on the 10th floor, a man in his late 40s stepped out of a glass-walled corner office. Tall, crisp haircut, a deliberate gait. His expression was restrained, but alert, the kind of face trained to read a room before anyone spoke. This was David Coleman. His eyes landed on Brian for half a second. Not long enough to be rude, just long enough to register and dismiss. A woman approached from the hallway. Sarah Whitman. Her stride smooth, her voice, even her confidence effortless. She nodded to David before turning her attention to Brian. "You must be Mr. Walker," she said. Professional, courteous, detached. He nodded. "HR is waiting inside. We'll start in just a moment." Her tone wasn't unkind, but something in her gaze flickered. Not judgment assessment. Inside the conference room, Tom Henderson welcomed him with a nod. His glasses sat slightly crooked on his nose, an odd contrast to his impeccably neat suit. He motioned Brian toward a chair. As Brian sat, a sound cracked faintly from the wall vent. A metallic tap echoing down the ductwork. No one reacted. But Brian stiffened. It reminded him of the heating pipe at home. A strange detail to cling to when his life was about to tilt. Across the table, David slowly closed a folder, his expression unreadable but firm. "Mr. Walker," he began, "thank you for coming in. Before we begin, I want to clarify something about today's interview." A pause. Controlled. Heavy. "This position is for someone who will be working very closely on one of our highest risk accounts. It demands precision discretion and the ability to handle extremely sensitive information under pressure." Brian nodded. "I understand." David's gaze sharpened. "Do you—" He didn't say it harshly. He didn't need to. The emphasis carried the weight. Brian's fingers curled slightly on the table. Behind David's composed front, something else stirred. A current of unease, barely masked beneath professionalism. A tension threading through the room that had nothing to do with Brian's resume. Sarah cleared her throat gently. "Let's begin with a scenario," she said, offering him a faint, almost sympathetic smile. "Imagine you had access to a data environment undergoing unexpected volatility. The projections shift in a way that doesn't align with any known variables. What's the first thing you would check?" Brian inhaled. Slow. He knew the answer. He'd studied this, lived this. But as he opened his mouth, the door at the far end of the room clicked. Soft, precise, like a cue in a play. Margaret Hale entered, CEO. Her presence changed the air instantly. Not with noise, not with motion, but with the weight of someone who didn't need permission to exist anywhere she stood. Her gray coat draped over one arm, her eyes cool and studying. She didn't greet him, didn't smile. She simply watched. Brian felt the pressure shift, not hostility. Something else. Like she wasn't evaluating his skills at all, but the way he breathed in the face of judgment. David straightened. Sarah folded her hands. Tom cleared his throat again too quickly. That was when Brian felt it, a subtle click inside his chest, like a warning, or the start of something he wasn't ready to name. He lowered his eyes to the table, then looked back up, and gave his answer. But even as he spoke, something in Margaret's expression flickered. Barely there. A shift only someone desperate to be believed would notice. A recognition. Not of him. Of a threat neither of them had spoken yet. A low hum vibrated through the conference table, so faint that only Brian reacted. The others sat still, their attention fixed on the monitor mounted to the wall. A static-filled alert flashed across the screen for a second, just long enough for the room temperature to seem to drop. Then it vanished, replaced by the firm's login banner as if nothing had happened. But something in that flicker carved a shallow line of tension across Margaret Hale's face. She masked it well. A smooth inhale, a slow blink, a subtle shift of weight. But she had seen it, and she knew exactly what it meant. David didn't. Not yet. He tapped his pen impatiently. Mr. Walker, continue. You were explaining anomaly tracking thresholds. His tone was sharper now, as if he were trying to pull the room back under his control. Brian answered, choosing each word with care. He described the first steps he'd take in a live data crisis, his breathing steady, despite the sudden knot in his gut. Sarah listened more closely this time, her eyes narrowing, leaning in without realizing it. Something about his simplicity, his directness, collided with the world they lived in, a world of jargon and posturing. But Margaret wasn't listening to the content of his answer. She listened to cadence, instinct, pressure, tolerance. She had seen seasoned analysts choke under less. The faint hum returned, a tremor in the lights barely perceptible. Sarah's eyes flicked upward. Is maintenance working on this floor again? No, David muttered. They're not. Tom tapped a quick message into his tablet, pretending not to be rattled, but the slight shake of his hand betrayed him. Another flicker of static flashed on the conference monitor, longer this time. A scrambled cascade of characters, a half-loaded dashboard. Then black. Christ, David whispered. He stood abruptly, pushing his chair back with a screech. Not today! Not now! The door swung open before anyone else could react. A young systems tech, barely out of college, appeared in the doorway, breathless pale, clutching a radio in one hand. Ms. Hale, he said, voice cracking, Ops needs you, immediately. David snapped, This is a restricted meeting, Mason. But Mason didn't look at David. He didn't dare. His eyes stayed on Margaret. Ma'am. They think someone's inside the Horizon environment. Silence washed over the room, thick as winter fog. Sarah's stomach tightened. Inside, you mean a breach. Mason swallowed hard. We can't confirm. Logs aren't matching. Files are duplicating, disappearing. The model's outputs are well jumping. David rounded on him. You're not making sense. Horizon's environment is locked behind tiered encryption. No one can just walk in. I know, sir. But something is happening. Mason looked at Brian for the first time. Their eyes met for a second, just long enough for Brian to see raw fear living beneath the kid's composure. Margaret rose slowly, deliberately. Everyone, stay where you are. Her voice cut through the panic like a blade. Mason stepped aside as she moved toward him. Just before leaving, she paused, turning her head slightly toward Brian. Mr. Walker, you will remain here until I return. David blinked, thrown off balance. Why him? But Margaret didn't answer. She left the room with the same calm brevity of a surgeon walking into an operating theater. The door clicked shut. Tension snapped like overstretched wire. Sarah stood. What the hell is going on? David didn't look at her. He stared at the monitor, now dark reflections of his own unsettled expression warped across the black glass. I don't know, he whispered, as if admitting that itself was dangerous. Tom smoothed his tie, attempting professionalism. Everyone needs to stay composed. I'm sure Ops A distorted beep cut through his sentence. The conference speaker came alive with a low crackle, then a digital tone. Sharp. Off-key. Wrong. Brian stiffened. Sarah looked at him. You recognize that? He hesitated. Maybe. David snapped back to life. You... What do you mean? Maybe Brian leaned forward, studying the speaker as if trying to hear something beneath the noise. Years ago at the warehouse, the inventory system glitched all the time. When someone tried to push manual overrides too fast, the alert system would choke. It made a sound like that. A system under pressure. This isn't a warehouse, David said coldly. I know, Brian replied, meeting his gaze. But machines under strain still sound like machines under strain. The speaker crackled again. Then, faintly, a voice broken, clipped, almost mechanical filtered through. Model corrupted. Cascade spreading. Need full. Lockdown. Hail. Now. Tom's face drained of color. That's ops. It has to be. David shook his head. No, ops channels don't route to conference rooms. They do if the override was tripped, Sarah murmured. David turned slowly toward her. His eyes sharpened. You think this is an override? I think Margaret thinks it is. She answered quietly. Brian watched them, feeling the pressure building in the room. He didn't understand everything they were saying, but he knew fear when he saw it. He knew the look of people realizing they were losing something they thought they controlled. The speaker hissed softly, then went silent. A beat of stillness. Then, all at once, the conference monitor lit up, not with graphs, but with a flashing line of red text. Unauthorized process detected. Sarah stepped back, breath-catching. Are we being hacked? David moved to the laptop at the center of the table. Impossible. There's no external entry point. Horizon's environment is isolated. The red text blinked. Process replication in progress. Brian frowned. Replication. That doesn't sound like a hack. Sarah looked at him sharply. What do you mean Brian chose his words? If someone wanted to steal data, they wouldn't broadcast their presence. Replicating processes like that, it sounds more like someone inside trying to force the model to stabilize. Like a panic move. Or a cover-your-tracks move. David bristled. You're speculating about systems you've never touched, True Brian said. But stress behavior looks the same across systems, whether it's a warehouse scanner or a forecasting engine. Sarah watched him carefully now, something shifting behind her eyes. Another line flashed on the screen, Horizon Suite, compromised. The door burst open. Margaret stood there again, her coat gone, sleeves rolled up, expression carved from stone. Behind her came two security officers and the head of ops, a man in his 60s, with trembling hands. Margaret stepped inside. Everyone away from the equipment. Her tone allowed no argument. The officers unplugged the conference laptop, disabling any input. The monitor went dark once more. Ops Director Barnes ran a hand through his thinning hair. It's bad, Margaret. Something triggered recursive loops inside Horizon's predictive layer. The system is trying to rewrite its own files. Tom whispered, Can that happen? Barnes shook his head. Not on its own. David leaned forward, voice cracking. You're saying someone inside triggered it? Barnes didn't answer. Margaret's gaze swept the room. Calm, cold, controlled. Until we identify the source, she said, no one in this room is to leave this floor. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Then Margaret looked directly at Brian, and for the first time he saw something unmistakable in her eyes. Recognition. Not of him. Of the fact that he was the only person in the room she hadn't ruled out. Yet. The lock on the conference room door clicked from the outside, a quiet metal whisper that carried far more weight than its volume. Brian felt it in his spine. A room full of people with titles and authority suddenly looked smaller, boxed in their confidence, evaporating like breath on cold glass. The air shifted tight and charged, humming, with the kind of tension only fear could summon. Margaret stood at the head of the table, hands clasped lightly behind her back. The posture was calm, almost relaxed, but her eyes held the same stillness of a winter lake, beautiful, opaque, impossible to read. "We need to be very clear," she said. "Someone in this building triggered an internal cascade that threatened a major client model, and that someone either acted recklessly or deliberately." Her gaze moved across the room. David straightened his tie. Sarah locked her jaw. Tom rubbed the bridge of his nose, glasses sliding dangerously low. None of them looked innocent anymore. They looked cornered. Brian kept his hands under the table. They were shaking, and he didn't want anyone to see. Ops Director Barnes placed a folder on the table, the pages trembling slightly as he let it go. "These are timestamp logs, pulled from the containment layer, before the system locked itself," he said. "We're not distributing them yet. Not until we understand what we're looking at." Sarah exhaled a shaky breath. "Does it show who accessed the environment?" Barnes hesitated. "Too long. Too noticeably. It shows anomalies," he said. David stepped forward, a sharp edge to his voice. "Anomalies aren't answers. Horizon is a tiered access environment. We need clear attribution. Was it a user A failed script? A corrupted endpoint? Ops should have Barnes snapped. Ops is doing everything they can." David blinked, startled. Barnes wasn't the type to raise his voice. Ever. Margaret lifted a hand, silencing them both. "Enough. Sit." They obeyed. Her eyes moved to Brian. "Mr. Walker, come here." Brian froze. "Ma'am, I now." He stood slowly stepping toward her as every pair of eyes followed him. The room felt too warm, like the air itself was watching. Margaret opened the folder. "Your presence here today is unusual, wouldn't you agree?" Brian swallowed hard. "I wasn't expecting to still be here. No." "And yet you are," she said. "And you observed something none of my team did, something that may be connected to this event." Brian felt heat creep up his neck. "I just recognized a pattern, that's all. I wasn't trying to—" "You weren't trying to do anything," Margaret said, cutting him off, "except pay attention. Which is more than I can say for several people in this room." A faint tremor passed through David's eye. Sarah's shoulders tightened. Margaret slid a page toward Brian. "Look." The sheet contained a list of activity flags, rows of numbers, and shorthand codes he didn't fully understand. But his eyes caught one thing instantly, a repeating timestamp, a strange rhythm. He leaned closer. "These look intentional." David scoffed. "Excuse me?" He's not even trained. But Margaret didn't look at David. She watched Brian. "What do you see?" she asked. Brian hesitated. "The intervals. They're too clean. If this were a system malfunction, the time between triggers would drift. But this, it looks timed, like someone was prodding the system to check responses, not break it." Sarah whispered, "Diagnostic probing." Barnes nodded slowly. "Yes. Someone trying to see what the model would do under pressure." Tom paled. "Why would anyone do that?" Another silence stretched across the room. Thick, heavy, sticky with suspicion. Brian stepped back, wanting distance from the folder, from the attention. "I didn't do anything," he said quietly. "I barely know how your system works." Margaret's eyes softened, not warm, but precise, calculating. "If you had done something, she said we would know." David slammed his palm gently against the table. "Then who?" Who had access today? Barnes looked at him, the weight of years settling onto his shoulders. "Your team, Coleman. Anyone with mid-level clearance could have run those probes." Sarah turned toward David, eyes sharp. "Mid-level. Not junior analysts. Not HR. Not ops. You know what that means. David bristled. Are you accusing me? No, she said. I'm saying someone in this building wanted Horizon destabilized long enough to be noticed. Tom spoke up, voice thin. Or to fail. Margaret's expression didn't change, but a storm gathered behind her eyes. Then Brian noticed something no one else did. Barnes was sweating. A slow bead rolled down from his temple, tracing the deep line of a man who'd spent his life buried in screens and server rooms. He wasn't just shaken from the breach, he was scared. More scared than the others. Brian felt it like a low vibration. Something in the way Barnes clasped his shaking hands. Something in the way he avoided Margaret's eyes. He opened his mouth, then hesitated. He didn't know these people well enough to trust his instincts. And yet... The lights flickered again. This time, every bulb in the ceiling hummed. The room dimmed, glowed, steadied. It felt like the building itself was breathing. Margaret tapped her earpiece. Ops, she said sharply, report. A voice crackled through faint static. Ma'am, the Horizon environment has stabilized. But what? There was an outbound attempt. A data packet tried to escape the sandbox. It was blocked, but only barely. The room erupted. David sprang to his feet. Outbound. That's impossible, Sarah whispered. Someone tried to transmit something. Tom dropped his pen. Barnes closed his eyes. That was when it hit Brian. Barnes didn't just look scared. He looked caught. Barnes finally spoke, voice thin and breaking. Margaret, I need to tell you something. The room held its breath. I didn't trigger the breach, he said, but I know who did. Margaret's stare turned to stone. Say it. Barnes wiped his forehead with a shaking hand. Someone accessed Horizon last night, long before the alert. An account that shouldn't exist. An account we thought was archived. David's voice cracked. Whose account? Barnes looked at him, then at Sarah, then at Tom. Finally he looked at Margaret. Hers. The room froze. No one breathed. Tom stammered, What? What does that mean? Who is that referring to? But Brian knew before the others did, knew by the way Margaret didn't flinch, knew by the shadow that passed through her eyes. Sarah spoke first, barely above a whisper. You're saying the system recorded activity from the former CTO's login. Barnes nodded helplessly. David's voice trembled. But she's gone, retired, out of the country. Barnes shook his head. Retired wasn't the word they used in her exit file. Margaret held up a hand, silencing all of them. Her voice was low, controlled, icy. There are things I have not told you, she said, because I hoped they would never matter again. Her gaze shifted to Brian, and this time the recognition was unmistakable, because whatever was coming next, he was already part of it. The room felt colder, as if someone had opened a door to winter and forgotten to close it. Margaret didn't move for a long moment. She stood perfectly still, shoulders squared, breath-even gaze fixed on something far beyond the conference room walls. When she finally spoke, her voice was a low current of controlled power. She didn't retire, Margaret said. She was removed. David blinked hard. Removed. You mean terminated? Margaret said. For cause. Tom's mouth parted in shock. But her file. Her file says what the board wanted it to say, she replied. What keeps investors calm? What avoids questions? She stepped closer to the table, eyes sweeping across the faces of the people she led. The truth is more complicated. Brian stood frozen near the head of the room, afraid to breathe, afraid not to. Something about Margaret's tone felt like a blade sliding quietly across old wounds. Sarah leaned forward. What did she do? Margaret inhaled slowly. 5 years ago, Sterling and Grant's then Chief Technology Officer, Dr. Evelyn Shore, initiated unsanctioned experiments inside the predictive analytics suite. She pushed the models beyond their safe parameters using anonymized client data without the board's approval. She claimed she was developing a self-correcting engine that could detect human error. What she created instead was a model that learned to override its own constraints. David whispered, "Autonomous recursion." Margaret nodded. Exactly. If we hadn't caught it early, it could have corrupted entire portfolios, possibly even exposed client data. Barnes closed his eyes. We scrubbed every trace. Or, we thought we did. But her login, Sarah, pressed. How is it still active? That should be impossible. Barnes swallowed hard. That's the part I didn't want to say in front of the entire team without confirmation. I checked the archival logs twice, then a third time. He lifted trembling fingers. Her access wasn't reactivated by accident. Someone approved it. David stared, who Barnes didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Because the silence already had. Margaret. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's breaths turned shallow. Margaret, did you... No. Margaret said, firm and sharp enough to cut through the rising panic. I did not restore her credentials. But someone who wanted you to believe I did might have. Brian felt the tension shift, not away, not fading, but coagulating into something more dangerous, something personal. Tom cleared his throat, voice cracking. Ma'am, with respect, if someone is impersonating a former executive. That's not just an internal breach. That's a federal crime. Margaret turned her gaze to him. I'm aware. Another flicker came from the lights above. This time, the bulbs dimmed all at once, as if the building itself was preparing to speak. The speaker crackled. An automated alarm tone bled through distorted. Then a synthetic voice announced, unauthorized access attempt detected on secure floor 12, initiating partial lockdown. David shot to his feet. No! 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 Ops cleared 12 2 hours ago. Barnes looked sick. Unless whoever did this wasn't trying to get in earlier. Unless they were waiting for all of us to be occupied here. Sarah murmured. A diversion. Tom clutched the table. So the breach up here, this entire mess, could have been staged. Not staged, Margaret said softly. Engineered. Her eyes lifted toward the ceiling, as if she could see straight through it, to the humming floors above. Someone wants Horizon compromised. Someone wants this company humiliated or worse. Brian felt a prickle run along the back of his neck. Something in the whole chain of events hit too clean, too coordinated. He didn't know corporate sabotage, but he knew when a fight had more than one angle. He spoke without thinking. Why use a dead account? Everyone turned to him. He swallowed. I mean, if someone wanted to hide, they'd use stolen credentials from someone who still works here. Someone who logs in every day. Using an archived account. It's too obvious. It draws attention. For the first time since the lockdown began, a spark sharp curious lit in Margaret's eyes. Go on. Brian hesitated, but the words came anyway. It feels like misdirection, not a mask, a flare. Something meant to make every finger point in one direction while the real work is happening somewhere else. Sarah stared at him, shaken. He's right. Evelyn Shore's credentials are the loudest breadcrumb anyone could have left. David muttered, Then what's the real goal? Barnes flipped frantically through the logs. The outbound attempt. Margaret exhaled slowly. Someone is fishing, testing weak points, looking for a window. But what could they possibly want? Tom whispered. Margaret's eyes sharpened. Not data. David frowned. Then, what leverage? The word dropped into the room like a heavy stone. No one moved. Then a sudden violent metallic slam echoed above them, something hitting a distant door. Then another. Then hurried footsteps, muffled, pounding down a hallway. Security officer number 1 grabbed his radio. Team's report from floor 12. What's happening up there, static? Security officer number 2 tried his channel. 12, respond. We're under partial lockdown, still nothing. Barnes whispered, God help us. Margaret strode to the door, reaching for the handle. But officer number 1 blocked her. Ma'am, protocol. You stay here. Margaret stared him down. Protocol doesn't understand what we're dealing with. Brian stepped closer before he could stop himself. If it's not safe. Margaret turned to him, and for a moment the hardness in her expression eased. Not softened, never softened, but shifted with something like recognition. You don't know what unsafe is, Mr. Walker, she said. Not yet. Her hand brushed the door handle again. The lights went out. All at once. Darkness swallowed the room thick and absolute. Gasps filled the space. A chair scraped. Someone cursed quietly. A single emergency strip along the floor flickered on, washing the room in a faint red glow, turning shadows into silhouettes. Every figure looked carved from stone. Brian's pulse hammered. It felt too much like the dark of his apartment during outages when Lily would cling to him and pretend she wasn't afraid. This darkness didn't feel like that. This one felt like it watched back. Then soft footsteps outside the door. Slow, measured. The kind of steps someone took when they wanted to be heard. Officer number 2 reached for his holster. Identify yourself. The footsteps stopped. Silence, thick, suspended, then muffled through the door. A voice. Feminine, calm, unfamiliar. I wouldn't open. That, the voice said. Not yet. Sarah inhaled sharply. Who is that? Brian's skin prickled. Something in the tone stirred discomfort. Not threat exactly, but intention. The voice came again. Ms. Hale knows why I'm here. Every head jerked toward Margaret. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She only said 2 words. Quiet, but edged with steel. She's early. Brian felt the temperature drop again. Someone outside the door laughed softly, an echo of someone who enjoyed being ahead in a game no one else had realized they were playing. Then the voice whispered, Open the door, Margaret. And the emergency lights flickered. The red emergency glow carved every face in the room into sharp planes of fear and suspicion as the voice on the other side of the door fell silent. Only the hum of the backup generator vibrated faintly through the floor. Brian felt the weight of the moment settle into his chest like a stone. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to matter. Yet something in that voice, calm, confident, unsettling, had spoken Margaret's name with an intimacy that didn't belong to strangers. Margaret stepped forward until her silhouette was framed in the dim red light. She placed her hand on the door, and the entire room stiffened. Officer number 1 whispered, Ma'am, protocol says we wait for tactical support. The corner of Margaret's mouth tightened. Protocol didn't factor in who's standing on the other side. Sarah's voice trembled. Is it her? Is it actually Evelyn Shore? Margaret didn't answer immediately. She lifted her head, listening to the quiet, like someone reading the last few notes of a long-forgotten song. Then she said, No. Evelyn Shore is gone. Whoever is out there borrowed her voice. A soft knock echoed through the room, 2 quick taps, then 1 slow, not a threat. A signal. Brian's breath caught. He knew that pattern. He didn't know how, but he did. A familiarity flickered like a shadow behind his ribs. Before anyone could stop her, Margaret pressed the manual release. The lock disengaged with a whisper. The door opened no more than an inch, but a sliver was enough. Cold hallway air drifted in, brushing across Brian's skin like the first breath before a storm. A woman's eye appeared in the gap, Blue, clear, sharp, with unspoken knowledge. "Hello, Margaret," she said. This time, her voice was not filtered through speakers or walls. It was real, present, too calm for the chaos she'd just caused. "It's been a long time." Margaret didn't flinch. "Not long enough. You always did prefer distance." The woman pushed the door gently. The officers braced against it, but she didn't fight them. She let the space stay narrow. She wanted control, not entry. Tom whispered, "Who is she?" The woman's gaze flicked toward the sound, catching Tom's fear like a reflection on glass. "You weren't here when I left," she said. "Count yourself fortunate." Barnes's breath hitched. He stepped back, as though the sight of her had cut something loose inside him. It can't be. But the woman smiled faintly. "Hello, Alan?" Barnes looked like he might collapse. "No, they said you'd retired," she finished. Such a forgiving word. No need to explain. No need to admit mistakes. No need to question who signed the order. Sarah stepped closer to the doorway, anger threading through her fear. "If you're Evelyn Shore, prove it." Evelyn didn't blink. "You built your first anomaly detection model using replicated sample data because you didn't trust Coleman's input slate. And you told no one, not even him." Sarah's jaw fell. She staggered backward. David turned red. How the hell would she know that Evelyn's eye shifted to him? "Because I trained the woman who trained you. Don't pretend you're not standing on ground I poured the concrete for." David bristled, but the words hollowed something inside him. Margaret tightened her grip on the door. "Why are you here to return something?" Evelyn said. "And to collect something that was taken from me." Brian felt the temperature drop again. He searched her voice, her tone, her cadence, like trying to recognize a face from a dream he didn't remember having. Why did this feel connected to him? Margaret's voice cut through the question. "You don't get to make demands in my building." "Your building." Evelyn let out a soft exhale that was almost a laugh. "You think the board told you everything. You think they gave you a kingdom without a ghost in the walls." The lights flickered overhead. The red glow pulsed. Somewhere down the hall, a relay clicked a mechanical heartbeat. "Let me in," Evelyn said, "or I'll speak where everyone can hear." Officer number 1 shook his head fiercely. "Ma'am, she's provoking you. Step back." Margaret didn't move. Brian felt something shift, something brittle in the air. Evelyn's voice softened. "I don't want your company, Margaret. I want the truth acknowledged. What happened 5 years ago wasn't an accident. It wasn't an engineering failure. It was a choice." "Stop," Margaret said quietly. "You made that choice," Evelyn continued, "and they let you bury me for it." Margaret's eyes flashed a grief or fury or memory Brian couldn't decode, but her posture remained a fortress. Brian stepped forward before he realized he had moved. "What choice?" Evelyn turned her gaze toward the narrow opening. Her expression softened by a fraction. "You must be Mr. Walker." Brian froze. "You don't know me." "Yes," she said gently. "I do." Every nerve in his body went cold. Evelyn's tone remained calm, melodic. "You asked earlier why someone would use a dead credential. The answer is simple. Because dead things aren't supposed to walk." The hallway lights behind her snapped off one by one, like someone clicking fingers in the dark. Evelyn leaned closer to the gap, her face barely visible now, except for the faint glint of her eyes. "I didn't come back to expose Sterling and Grant," she whispered. "I came back because someone inside this company has been rebuilding my work. Quietly, carefully, illegally." Silence swallowed the room. Margaret finally spoke. "No one here has access to your research. Everything was destroyed." Evelyn's expression sharpened. "You really believe that?" After everything, Barnes let out a strangled noise. "Margaret, the breach pattern. It matches the old recursion signature, David whispered. Which means... Evelyn finished for him. Which means it's not my ghost you should fear. It's the person trying to resurrect me. Sarah pressed a hand to her stomach, as though steadying herself. Who would even attempt that? Evelyn's eyes drifted back to Brian. His heartbeat thundered. No, not possible. He barely knew how this company worked. How could any of this connect to him? Evelyn spoke softly, almost kind. Tell me, Mr. Walker, when did you first start seeing patterns no one else saw? Before the warehouse job, before the online courses, before you even knew what data meant. Brian stepped back, breath thinning, a cold pressure settling behind his ribs. How could she possibly know that Evelyn continued, her voice smoothing like silk over the jagged air? There's a file, hidden, buried deeper than any audit will reach. It has your name on it. Brian shook his head. No. You're wrong. I've never... It was created when you were 14, she said. 2 years before your mother filed the request that disappeared. 4 years before your first aptitude assessment was flagged and sealed. Margaret's face drained of color. Evelyn, stop. But Evelyn kept speaking, her voice a steady blade. You were part of a program Margaret inherited, a program she was ordered to shut down, a program designed to find untrained pattern savants. Her voice dropped to a whisper. People like you. Brian felt the room tilt. The floor seemed to sway. His breath thinned into nothing. Margaret stepped between him and the door with sudden force. He is not part of this. Evelyn's smile was small, sad. He always was. The emergency lights flickered once more. Then the entire building shook. A shudder rippled through the walls, as if something deep in the infrastructure had convulsed. Officer number 1 steadied himself. What was that? Evelyn's voice came soft through the crack of the door. That, she said, was the first hourglass turning. Brian staggered back, pulse hammering. Evelyn's final words slid through the dark like a warning only he was meant to hear. Time is running out, Mr. Walker. And you're the only one who doesn't know why. The floor's tremor dissolved into a ringing stillness, the kind that followed earthquakes or gunshots or truths spoken too clearly. Dust drifted from the ceiling vents. The emergency lights steadied again, bathing the room in a dull crimson haze. Brian felt the weight of every stare pressing into him, heavy enough to bruise. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to matter. Yet Evelyn Shore had spoken his name like it was a key she'd been waiting years to turn. Margaret moved first. She pulled the door closed with a firm, echoing thud, sealing Evelyn Shore back into the hallway. Her jaw was set, eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in calculation. She turned toward the room and spoke with the clipped precision of a surgeon deciding which artery to clamp. No one leaves this room, she said. Not until I say. Officer number 1 nodded and re-engaged the manual lock. The mechanism clicked into place with a metallic snap. David exhaled shakily. What does she mean there's a file on him, on Walker? That doesn't make any sense. Margaret ignored him. Sarah stared at Brian as though seeing him for the first time. Is any of it true? Were you part of some program? Brian forced air into his lungs. No. I told you I worked warehouse jobs, delivery routes. I took online courses. That's it. His voice cracked, betraying him. I'm nobody. But the moment he said it, the words felt wrong. Thin. Too easy. Evelyn's whispers clung to his mind. When did you first start seeing patterns no one else saw? He didn't want to remember. Not the tests at the school counselor's office. Not the strange shapes adults held in front of him. Not the day when 2 men in suits came to the house and said he had potential. Not the way his mother's face folded with both hope and dread when she asked them questions they never fully answered. Margaret watched him closely. Too closely. "Mr. Walker," she said gently, "tell me what you remember." He shook his head hard. "Nothing. I don't remember anything that matters." But something stirred. A faint pressure in his skull, like a door rattling behind a wall he'd bricked up years ago. Barnes spoke next, voice trembling. "Margaret, did the board keep the program logs, the ones from the Pattern Initiative?" Sarah's head snapped toward him. "The what?" Margaret's expression didn't change, but a shadow crossed her eyes. "It was shut down before I became CEO." David pushed away from the table, pacing. "Hold on. You mean the pattern recognition study from years back?" "That was real. I thought it was corporate legend." "It was real," Margaret said quietly, "and it was dangerous." Brian felt his breath thin again. "What did they do?" Barnes wiped his forehead. "The motion jerky. They screened adolescents from underfunded districts. Kids who showed unusual aptitude for predicting complex patterns without formal training. They believed it could be cultivated into early-stage analytics talent." Sarah stiffened. Children. They experimented on children, not experiments. Margaret said firm, but not unkind. It was meant to be enrichment, but it became something else when the board got involved. They wanted to fast-track savants into industry roles before they reached adulthood. Tom whispered, horrified, "That's illegal." "Yes," Margaret said, "which is why it was buried." Brian clutched the edge of the table as a faint memory broke through a graph he'd drawn at 14, a counselor whispering to another behind the door. His mother signing papers she didn't fully understand. His stomach twisted. Evelyn's voice echoed in his mind. "You were part of a program Margaret inherited." He looked at Margaret. The question rose before he could stop it. "You knew about me," Margaret didn't flinch. "I knew there was a sealed name on the list, but I didn't know whose. The board protected that information. It vanished long before Horizon ever became a client." "But Evelyn didn't forget," Sarah said softly, "and someone brought her work back." Officer number 1 stepped beside Margaret, radio raised. "Ma'am, tactical units are still unresponsive. Floor 12 remains offline. We're blind." As if responding to his words, the monitor at the front of the room flickered back to life. Not fully just a sliver of light, a horizontal band of static, a flickering pulse. Then slowly, characters began to appear. "Hello, Margaret." The room froze. Another line appeared, one character at a time. "You took something from me." David staggered back. No! This can't be happening. That system shouldn't be able to." "It's not the system," Barnes whispered. "It's someone using it." Margaret stepped forward, voice icy calm. "Evelyn, stop this." A moment passed. Then the screen responded. "They lied to you. They lied to all of us, but not to him." A cursor blinked. Then a single name appeared. Brian Walker. Brian felt the blood drain from his face. He stumbled back into a chair. Sarah put a hand over her mouth. Why is she fixated on him? David's eyes were wild. Because she thinks he's valuable. A missing piece. Margaret spun toward the two officers. "Get ops to cut every connection to Horizon. Pull the physical cables if you have to." Officer number 2 grabbed his radio. "Ops, this is floor 10. Do you copy static?" Then a voice answered, distorted. Not Evelyn's, not anyone's. It sounded generated compressed. Wrong. Connection denied. Officer number 2's face twisted. "Who is this? Identify yourself." The voice came again, softer. "You cannot stop what is already in motion." The monitor blinked. Another message. "The model isn't the target. The company isn't the target." "He is." Brian jolted as if struck. Why me? No one could answer. Margaret turned slowly toward him. When she spoke, her voice had a gravity he'd never heard before. "Because you were never supposed to walk back into this building," she said. And someone with power wants you back in the game. Brian stared at her pulse, roaring in his ears. I don't have a game. I'm not anyone. Margaret stepped closer, lowering her voice. Then why do you think Evelyn Shore came out of hiding the day you walked into my building? His breath stuttered. No. Coincidence. It had to be. The monitor flickered again, rapid, glitching, almost frantic. Time is almost up open. The door. Officer number 1 drew his weapon. Nobody opens anything. This is a containment situation now. But Margaret shook her head slowly. Containment ended the moment she made contact. A loud, metallic creak echoed above them, something shifting in the ductwork. A vent panel loosened, swinging open with a hollow clang. Cold air rushed through the room. Brian looked up. Something slid out of the darkness, above small metallic the size of a wallet. A device. It dropped onto the floor with a soft clatter, skidding until it hit Brian's shoe. He stared at it. A blinking light pulsed on its surface. Barnes gasped. That's not one of ours. That's Margaret's eyes widened. Walker, don't touch it. But it was too late. The device projected a single line of text onto the floor in faint blue light. Brian, if you want answers, come alone. A second line appeared beneath it. She can't protect you, not this time. Brian looked up at Margaret. She didn't move, didn't speak. But in her eyes, in the smallest fracture of her expression, he finally saw fear. Not for the company, for him. And that was the moment he realized this wasn't a breach. It was a summons. Brian stared at the glowing words at his feet until they blurred, until the letters bled into the red emergency light, and the cold metallic hum of the building swallowed every thought he tried to form. The device kept pulsing steady as a heartbeat, each flash tightening something inside his chest. Alone. He was supposed to go alone. Whoever had breached the system, whoever had mimicked a dead woman's voice, whoever knew things about his childhood he'd spent years burying, wanted him without witnesses. Margaret moved first. She crouched beside the device, studying it with the caution of someone examining a venomous snake. Whoever deployed this, she murmured, got past every layer of security we have. This is not amateur work. David hovered behind her. So what do we do? Destroy it, call tactical. That depends, Margaret said without looking up. Walker, did you recognize anything about this? Brian tore his eyes from the glowing text. No, I've never seen anything like it. Margaret watched him for a beat too long, as if weighing whether she believed him. Did she ever contact you before today? At any point in your life? No, Brian whispered. I don't know this woman. A lie, and yet not fully a lie. He didn't know Evelyn Shore, but something in her voice, some buried chord had struck him like memory. Sarah folded her arms tightly across her chest. He shouldn't have to go anywhere alone. That's a trap. It's obviously a trap. Barnes rubbed his temples, voice cracking. Ma'am, that device is broadcasting. I can feel it in the network hum. If Ops can track the signal. But the moment he said it, the pulsing light dimmed, then brightened, projecting a new message across the floor tiles. No network, no trace, no time. Officer number 2 stepped back. It's reacting to us. It's listening. Margaret rose slowly. Something hardened in her expression, resolve maybe, or dread carved into discipline. She turned to Brian. She wants you for a reason. And until we know what that reason is, you're not leaving my sight. Brian shook his head. I don't understand any of this. I came for a job interview. I'm not part of whatever this is. Yes, Margaret said softly. You are. Before he could speak, the emergency lights flickered. The air pressure shifted a subtle sucking sensation, as if the building itself had inhaled sharply. The vents shuddered. Somewhere deep in the infrastructure, machinery stirred. Barnes paled. "Ma'am?" The building just switched to full isolation mode. Officer number 1 raised his radio. Isolation. "We didn't activate." Static swallowed him. David's voice cracked. "Then who the hell did—" A metallic clang answered him from the hallway outside, followed by the slow whir of mechanical locks, engaging one floor at a time. The sound rumbled downward, like a descending elevator, 13, 12, 11. Sarah pressed her hands to her ears. "She's sealing us in." "No," Margaret said. "She's sealing everyone else out." Officer number 2 backed toward the wall. "This is insane. We need to escort Walker to a secured room immediately." But Margaret didn't move. She stepped closer to Brian instead. Up close, her voice softened, just barely, but enough for him to hear the truth behind it. "Listen to me. Whoever is doing this believes you are the key, not the company, not Horizon. You." She exhaled slowly. "And that terrifies me more than anything she ever built." Brian's throat tightened. He had no memories of secret programs, no recollection of being anything other than a kid from a forgotten neighborhood whose mother worked too many jobs. Nothing that matched the weight Evelyn seemed to place on him. "I'm not who she thinks I am," he whispered. Margaret studied him, her eyes steady. "Then we're going to prove it. Together." A sharp knock shattered the moment, not at the door. Above them. Every head snapped upward. The open vent in the ceiling rattled again, violently, this time followed by the sound of something crawling through the duct metal, scraping metal, a rhythmic drag, deliberate and unhurried. Officer number 1 unholstered his weapon. Ma'am stepped back. The dragging grew louder, closer. A mechanical groan reverberated through the ceiling panel. Sarah whispered, "Someone's in the vents." Barnes corrected her voice hollow. "Not someone. Something." The panel buckled, hinges snapped. Then, with a heavy crash, a sleek black object dropped onto the table, a compact pod the size of a shoebox matte metal. No seams, no branding. It sat motionless for half a heartbeat. Then it opened. A small screen lit up on its surface. "Hello again. Brian." Brian stumbled back so hard he hit the wall. No, this isn't possible." The words shifted. "You asked why it's you. But that's the wrong question. Ask why now." Margaret stepped in front of him, shielding him instinctively. "Evelyn, stop this. You're scaring innocent people." The text changed instantly. "I am not Evelyn." The room stopped breathing. Another message appeared. "But I know what she started. Then and what she hid. Then and what you were meant to become." Brian felt the world tilt. "I wasn't meant to become anything." The device responded instantly, as if answering him directly. "You were meant to finish her work." David slammed his hands on the table. "This is madness. Walker barely knows how to navigate our internal system." But Barnes shook his head. "No, she doesn't mean the technical work." A beat of silence. Barnes swallowed hard. "She means the cognitive work, the pattern work." Brian's breath hitched. "Stop! I don't know what you're talking about." Sarah's voice softened unexpectedly. "Brian, when did you first start noticing patterns that other people didn't? In numbers, in noises, in people?" He froze. Memories flickered uninvited. The way he could predict which warehouse shipments would be late before anyone scanned them. The way he tracked his mother's moods by the rhythm of her steps, the pauses in her sentences. The way he saw corrections needed in the hiring tests here at Sterling and Grant before taking them. The way the Horizon error had leapt out at him in seconds. No, that wasn't special. That wasn't anything. Just survival. The device pulsed brighter. You were chosen years ago. You were left unfinished, and now it's time. Margaret slammed her hand down on the pod so hard the screen flickered. Whoever you are, she hissed, you will not use him. Not again. Another line appeared almost gentle. I am not using him. I am warning him. Then you are not safe here. Brian, not with them, not with her. Brian's gaze shot to Margaret. Her jaw tightened, and something in her eyes fractured pain. Betrayal, or maybe a truth she wished she could bury deeper. She whispered, Brian, don't listen to it. I'm trying to protect you. The device flashed red. She is lying. The temperature in the room dropped. No one spoke. No one even breathed. The pod projected one final message. Come to floor 12. Alone. Then the screen went dark. The silence that followed was enormous. David found his voice first. Walker is not going anywhere alone. We need to restrain him for his own safety. Officer number 1 nodded. We should escort him under protocol. But then Margaret stepped between them, and Brian's shoulder-squared voice, sharp as a blade. Anyone who touches him answers to me. The room froze again. Brian stared at her. For the first time, he couldn't tell if she was protecting him or claiming him. Officer number 1 lowered his weapon only slightly, uncertainty tightening the corners of his mouth. No one in the room seemed to know where authority ended, and danger began. Not anymore, not with the building sealed, not with a ghost in the machines calling Brian Walker by name. The air felt crowded thick with fear and unspoken blame. Every breath seemed to echo. Brian pressed his back against the wall, pulse thrumming beneath his skin. He didn't trust the pod, didn't trust the voice, didn't trust the flickering lights or the way the building seemed to listen. But he wasn't sure he trusted the people around him either. Not fully. Not after what he had just learned, what Margaret had not told him. The pod's message burned in his mind. You are not safe here. Margaret stepped closer, placing herself squarely between him and the rest of the room. Everyone calm down, she said, voice low but iron-tipped. We don't know who or what is behind this. But we do know Walker stays under my protection. David's eyes flashed. That's not your call alone. If he's involved, Sarah snapped. He walked in here for an entry-level interview, David. And now he's being hunted by a system breach that predates half the team. He's not the threat. Then why is he the target David shot back? Why does the intruder want him? Why does she know things about him? None of us did. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Because someone planted that information. Someone with access. The implication hung in the air. Barnes looked at Margaret. Ma'am, there's something you're not telling us. A muscle in Margaret's jaw tightened. There's plenty I'm not telling you, Alan. Because I don't have answers yet. But you suspected this. Barnes whispered. Didn't you? Margaret didn't respond. The silence was an admission. Brian felt the world tilt again. You knew something like this could happen. You knew, and you still brought me here. Her eyes didn't waver. I didn't bring you here. You applied. You earned the interview. And I didn't know Evelyn Shore was alive, or that someone would use her shadow to reach you. But there was something else behind her, calm, something hidden, something heavy. Brian felt anger rising like heat. But you knew I was on some list. You knew I was part of something before I ever walked into this building. Yes, she said quietly, and I kept it buried because you deserved a life outside of it. Outside of it. The phrase landed like a blow. Before he could respond, the conference monitor flickered again, just once, like a dying pulse, and went dark. Officer number 2 checked the hallway camera feed on his tablet. We've lost visuals on floors 10 through 13, completely blind. Sarah's breath shuddered. That's not random. Floor 12, that's where the message said to meet. David rubbed his temples hard. This is insane. Someone is puppeteering the entire building. They're isolating systems, feeding us messages, dropping tech into the vents like breadcrumbs. Barnes whispered, "No, not breadcrumbs. A path. But to what? To who?" Margaret turned to the officers. "Is there any access route to 12 from this floor? Elevators are locked." "Stairwells sealed on both ends," Officer 1 said. "Only emergency release codes open them, and we don't have them." They all turned to Margaret. She shook her head. "Not even the CEO has authority during isolation mode. That level of control belongs only to—" Her voice trailed off. "Only to the person who designed the security architecture Barnes finished." The name didn't need to be spoken. Evelyn Shore. Brian's skin prickled. The pod's last message echoed in him. "Come alone." He took a slow breath. "If this person, whoever they are, really wants me, they'll find a way." "Lockdowns won't stop them." "No," Margaret said sharply. "You're not going anywhere. You can't decide that." He said quietly, "You're not my guardian." Something cold flickered in her expression. "I'm trying to keep you alive." "And I'm trying to understand why any of this is happening," Brian said. "Everyone here thinks I know more than I do. I don't." "If going to 12 gives me answers, it won't give you answers," she said. "It will get you killed." Before Brian could argue, the conference door's lock clicked. Not loudly, not with force. Just a soft, deliberate tick. Everyone turned at once. Officer number 1 raised his weapon. "Whoever is out there, step back." No reply, only silence. Then another click. Something mechanical shifting inside the lock. Officer number 2 whispered, "That's not the override code. Someone's controlling it remotely." Sarah's breaths went shallow. "They're trying to get in." Margaret stepped forward, back away from the door. But Brian wasn't looking at the door. He was looking up. The vent. A faint glow pulsed again from inside it, white this time, not red. Something descended slowly, almost elegantly, like a spider, weaving down a single thread. Not a device, not a pod, a camera, a sphere no larger than a baseball, suspended on a thin, retractable wire, its lens turning and refocusing with unnerving precision. Barnes gasped. She used autonomous micro-units in her old prototypes, but those were banned, dismantled. David whispered, "Not all of them, apparently." The camera clicked softly. Then it projected a small rectangle of light onto the conference wall. The image sharpened. Floor 12, hallway empty. Lights dim. A single figure, standing with her back to the camera, still poised, waiting. "Is that Sarah?" breathed. Before she could finish, the figure turned. Evelyn Shore's face filled the projection, older than the last official photos of her, sharper around the cheekbones, eyes bright with something that wasn't madness but certainty. She spoke directly into the camera, and the words filled the room through its speaker. "Brian, I know you can hear me." Brian's chest tightened. Evelyn's voice deepened, softened, tightened all at once. "If you stay where you are, you will die with them." Margaret stepped forward, fury slicing through her calm. "Evelyn, stop this. Whatever you think you know." But Evelyn lifted one hand, silencing her. "This isn't about you anymore, Margaret. You did your best. You tried to contain what they created." Her gaze returned to Brian. "But you can't contain a mind like his. Not forever." Brian shook his head violently. "Stop saying that. I'm not whatever you think I am." Evelyn's expression softened into something almost mournful. "Your mother knew," she said. "That's why she pulled you from the program. That's why they tried to erase everything. But erasing data doesn't erase truth." Brian's world spun. "My mother never... Did she tell you where she worked before you were born?" Evelyn asked gently. Did she ever tell you why she moved out of state? Why she changed her last name when you were still an infant?" "No," Brian whispered, choking on the word. Margaret closed her eyes. Evelyn spoke like she was reading the answer off his face. "She didn't tell you because she was protecting you from the people who wanted to use your mind as a test bed." Sarah's face went white. David backed away from the projection. Tom trembled visibly. The door lock clicked again. Evelyn leaned closer to the camera lens. "Brian, you have one chance to learn who you are. One chance to understand why your mind sees what others can't." Her eyes burned with a truth she didn't bother softening. "If you don't come now, you'll never know." The projection cut to black. The camera snapped shut and withdrew into the vent like a spider vanishing into its web. Silence swallowed the room. Every eye turned to Brian. The door lock clicked a final time. Then, slowly, gently, the door drifted open, just a crack, enough to invite, enough to warn, enough to choose. Margaret whispered, "Brian, don't go." But Brian wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at the darkness, waiting on the other side of the door. And he felt deep in his bones that whatever waited on floor 12 had already reached into his life, long before he had stepped into this building. The hallway beyond the cracked door breathed cold air into the conference room, a long, slow exhale from a building shifting into something unrecognizable. Brian hesitated at the threshold, one foot rooted to the carpet, the other aching toward the dim corridor. The walls outside flickered with red safety strips, pulsing like veins under skin. He felt the room's eyes gripping his back, fear, suspicion, desperation twined together. But the pull from the hallway was stronger. It felt like a thread tugging behind his ribs, a thread Evelyn Shore had been pulling long before he ever knew her name. Margaret stepped behind him, voice low and firm. "Brian, look at me." He didn't turn. Couldn't. The door had become a horizon he couldn't pull his gaze from. "Brian," she said again, sharper now, "if you leave this room, I can't protect you." He closed his eyes. "Maybe you were never supposed to." The words weren't a challenge. They were the truth, raw, tired, inevitable. David moved forward, like he might grab Brian's arm, but Sarah blocked him with a hand across his chest. "Don't," she said. "Not unless you want to set off whatever trap this is." Barnes spoke from the far corner, voice trembling. He shouldn't go alone. Evelyn's work. The initiative. None of it was stable. The cognitive pressure alone could shatter someone not trained for it. Margaret's eyes flicked toward Barnes. He shouldn't go at all. "But he will," Sarah murmured. "Because she called him." Brian stepped into the hallway, not fully, just enough to let the sound hit him. A faint hum, a vibration along the floorboards, subtle, rhythmic pulsing through the steel skeleton of the building. It wasn't machinery, it wasn't failing electrical lines. It was something else. Something alive in the circuits, pacing like an intelligent presence waiting for him. He whispered, "I don't know who I am anymore." Margaret's voice came behind him, soft as a confession. "Neither did I. For years. Until I learned what the board had buried. Until I learned why they wanted the initiative erased." He turned his head slightly enough to see her in the red wash of the emergency lights. There was something new in her expression, not authority, not control. Regret. "Margaret," he asked quietly, "did you know my mother?" She stiffened. The answer came like a fracture. "Yes." The entire room inhaled sharply. Brian's chest caved inward. "You said nothing." "She made me promise," Margaret said, her voice tight. "She wanted you far away from this world. Far from anyone who remembered what you were capable of." "Why?" His voice cracked. "What did they do to me?" "Not to you," Margaret said. "To her." Before he could speak, another noise rose from the hallway, a soft metallic tapping. Steady, steady, steady. A pattern. 3 beats. Pause. 2 beats. Pause. 3 again. He knew that rhythm. A memory surfaced, a childhood memory sharpened by panic. Rain on his bedroom window. His mother tapping on his door in that exact cadence to tell him it was safe to come out after those men left. The men who said he had potential. Brian's breath hitched. Evelyn had known that rhythm. Evelyn had used it earlier through the speaker system. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. Brian, Margaret said, urgently stepping toward him. Whatever she's using, whatever signal, whatever code she's doing it, to destabilize you. She knows how to manipulate savant pattern cognition. Don't let her. The tapping grew louder, closer. Evelyn's voice drifted from the far end of the hallway, not through speakers this time, but faintly, like breath carried by a cold draft. Come on, Brian. Your mother trusted me once. You can trust me now. His stomach clenched. The voice was warm. Too warm. Like a hand sliding over an old scar. Margaret slammed her palm against the doorframe. That is not her voice. It's a synthesis, a mimic. Evelyn Shore is not standing at the end of that hallway. But the voice came again, stronger, clearer. Did Margaret tell you the truth, Brian? Did she tell you why your mother ran? Did she tell you who signed the order to bring you back? Margaret flinched. A small, involuntary movement, almost imperceptible. Almost. Brian saw it, and the floor beneath him seemed to drop. Is that true? He whispered. Margaret opened her mouth, but no sound came. The silence answered for her. A cold wave washed up Brian's spine. You were going to bring me back into the program. No, she said instantly. I fought against it. For years, I kept your file buried. I made sure no one could track you. But you knew where I was, he said, voice cracking. All this time. Her eyes softened with grief. Because she asked me to. He blinked. My mother. She didn't trust the board, Margaret said. She didn't trust Evelyn. She trusted me. She asked me to watch from a distance, to keep you safe while giving you a normal life. And I did. I promised her. The tapping stopped. Silence clamped over the hallway like a lid. Then Evelyn's voice whispered from everywhere. At once the ceiling vents, the cracked door, the walls. And she broke that promise the moment you walked into Sterling and Grant. Margaret stiffened. I didn't bring him here. He came on his own. But you didn't send him away, Evelyn said, because you knew the truth would find him eventually. Brian pressed a hand to his temple. His mind felt stretched, pulled toward 2 truths that couldn't exist together. Margaret's voice was calm now. Too calm. Brian. Listen to me carefully. The initiative was designed to turn minds like yours into engines. Pattern engines. Systems that could see what machines couldn't. Evelyn wanted to push the limits. She didn't care what it did to the test subjects. Evelyn's voice cut through her words like a scalpel. He's not a subject. A pause. He's a successor. Brian's knees nearly buckled. Sarah whispered, horrified. A successor to what? A low hum rolled through the hallway lights, making the shadows vibrate. To the cognitive engine Evelyn Shore built, Barnes said, trembling. The one that almost destroyed this company 5 years ago. Margaret rounded on Barnes. Stop talking. Barnes ignored her. He's not just a pattern savant, Barnes whispered. He is the missing half of Shore's recursive model, the human half. The words hung heavy in the stale air. David stumbled backward. Then floor 12. What is it? A server room, a lab. Barnes swallowed. It was the old initiative chamber. Brian felt everything in him go cold. Margaret closed her eyes. I shut it down. I sealed it off. No one has been down there since I took over. Evelyn's voice answered her. "You sealed the door, not the mind inside it." A sudden electric buzz snapped through the hallway, and for a heartbeat, the emergency lights flared white-hot. Then a single line of text appeared on the wall behind Brian, projected from somewhere unseen. Clean, precise, final. "Brian, if you don't come, she will come for you." The door creaked wider. Margaret grabbed Brian's arm. "Don't go! Please! Not like this!" He looked at her hand. The grip wasn't control. It was fear. Fear of losing him. Fear of what waited below. Fear of what she already knew about him. Brian stepped back. Her fingers slipped away. He didn't run. He didn't decide. He simply walked toward the hallway, toward the shadows, toward the truth that had been stalking him since he was a child. Behind him, someone screamed his name. He didn't turn around. Brian stepped into the corridor, fully letting the door fall shut behind him, with a soft but decisive thud. The sound felt final, like a chapter sealing itself. The red emergency lights along the floor cast the hallway in a low pulsing glow, flattening depth, bending shadows. Each step he took echoed down the empty stretch, the silence growing heavier the farther he walked from the room he had just left. The voices of the team, of Margaret, of the life he almost had, faded into a distant hum behind the thick glass. Ahead, the hallway yawned open, like a throat leading towards something ancient and waiting. He moved slowly at first, unsure if the floor beneath him would tremble again, unsure what kind of machines breathed in the wall cavities. Everything felt unnaturally still, as if the building itself was holding its breath. But as he approached the elevator bank, a faint vibration hummed beneath his shoes. Not mechanical, rhythmic, purposeful. A frequency that felt less like noise and more like recognition. It resonated deep inside his skull, like the memory of a lullaby he'd forgotten he knew. The elevator panel flickered when he reached for it. He didn't press anything. He didn't have to. The button for floor 12 lit by itself, dim but determined. Then the doors opened, silently, revealing a car lit by a soft blue glow that didn't match the emergency lighting of the rest of the building. The car smelled faintly of cold metal, and something older like papers sealed in an attic too long. Brian hesitated only for a breath. Then he stepped inside. The doors closed. No sound accompanied the descent. No cables groaned, no gears clicked. The elevator simply fell in weightless quiet, smooth as sinking into deep water. As he watched the floor indicator tick downward, an uneasy truth tightened around him. This elevator wasn't following building protocols. This elevator belonged to the ghost of the past Evelyn had warned him about. When the doors parted, they revealed a hallway bathed in low blue light, colder than the floor above. The tiles here were clean, too clean, as though no foot had stepped on them since the day this level was sealed. The walls were bare, except for a faded imprint where a sign had once hung. The air held a sterile bite that reminded Brian of long hospital corridors, and the memory of voices whispering behind one-way mirrors. The tapping sound began again, faint but unmistakable. 3 beats. Pause. 2 beats. Pause. 3 again. He followed at each step, slow and unwilling, yet inevitable. The corridor widened into a circular vestibule with a heavy steel door at the far end. Its edges glimmered with faint electronic pulses, as if the door were still alive despite the years of abandonment. Then he saw her. A figure stood with her back to him, centered in the blue haze. Not Evelyn. Not anyone he recognized. A woman in a simple gray coat, hands clasped lightly in front of her head, tilted as if listening to something distant. She turned slowly, and Brian felt his breath punch out of him. It was not Evelyn Shore, but her face resembled Evelyn's enough to be unsettling. A sister, maybe, or a mirror built from memory. Age had traced faint lines along her eyes and mouth, but her posture was sharp, her gaze quick and deliberate. "Hello, Brian." She said, her voice steady and human, despite the digital mimicry that had carried it earlier. "You took longer than I expected." Brian stopped several paces away. "Who are you?" She smiled faintly, hands lowering. "Not Evelyn. Though that much you've gathered. She was a mentor once, a flawed one, an ambitious one, but she's not the ghost that summoned you here." Then who did her eyes warmed not with kindness, but understanding? Someone who knew you before you knew yourself. Someone who believed in what your mind could become. His stomach twisted. "You were part of the initiative." She nodded. "Not as a subject. As an architect, I helped build the training models. I monitored the cognitive thresholds. I watched candidates rise and break and rise again." She stepped closer. "And I watched your mother shut the door on all of it to save you." Cold washed down his spine. "You knew her." "I knew her brilliance," the woman said, "and her fear." She tilted her head. She was right to be afraid. The board never intended to nurture the children in the initiative. They wanted instruments, predictive engines, minds that could navigate what machines couldn't. Minds like yours. Brian clenched his fists. "I don't want any of this. I'm just trying to make a living. I'm just trying to take care of my daughter." The woman's gaze softened in a way that felt almost maternal. "And that instinct, protective, relentless, is why you're still intact. Many of the initiative candidates didn't have an anchor. You do. But you can't outrun what's waking up inside you. Not anymore. What does any of this have to do with Horizon, with the breach, with the lockdown?" Her expression shifted. Sad. Resolute. Horizon was never the target. You were. The instability in the system wasn't sabotage. It was a signal. A test. I needed to see if the patterns would call to you again, after all these years. A deep thud sounded behind the steel door, like something heavy shifting. Or breathing. Brian stepped back. "What's behind that door?" "The original recursive engine," she said. "The one Evelyn built. The one Margaret tried to destroy. But not all knowledge stays buried. Some of it survives in minds. Yours. Mine. Evelyn's." The tapping resumed, louder now, from inside the door. Brian's pulse spiked. "I'm not opening that." "You don't have to," she said calmly. "It's already open." The electronic pulses along the door's edges brightened, sliding apart like splitting nerves. The metal groaned. A seam widened. Cold air rushed out, carrying a faint hum that resonated inside Brian's skull like a tuning fork struck too close to bone. The woman turned her face back toward the widening gap. "You were meant to complete it. Not through code, through cognition, through the patterns only your mind can see." "I'm not helping you," Brian said, the fear sharpening into something firmer. "I'm not helping any of you." "You already did," she whispered, "by coming here, by choosing truth over comfort." The door yawed wider. Inside, dim monitors flickered to life, forming a circle of pale blue light around a central seat. Restraints hung loose on its arms, like sleeping metal limbs. The machinery pulsed with a slow rhythm that matched his heartbeat. Or controlled it. He couldn't tell. The woman looked back at him once more. "You can walk away, but walking away won't change what you are. And it won't stop the others from coming, not after tonight." "Others," he whispered. She nodded. There were more children in the initiative. Some lost, some hidden, some waiting. And they have spent years searching for the one who can finish what Evelyn began. Brian felt the floor tilt. "Why me?" Because she said softly, "You survived without breaking." The machine hummed louder, beckoning. Brian backed away, turning toward the elevator. The woman didn't stop him. "You're not ready. But you will be. And when that time comes, the world won't be asking if you want the responsibility. It will be demanding it. The lights flickered once, then everything went dark. Brian ran. Through the corridor, through the pulsing red strips, through the elevator that opened as if expecting him. He didn't breathe until the doors closed, and the car climbed upward, leaving the frozen blue shadows below. When the doors opened on the conference level again, Margaret stood waiting just outside the others behind her, like a fractured constellation. Relief flooded her eyes quickly, buried beneath resolve. "You came back," she said. "For now," Brian whispered. "But everything's changed." Margaret nodded. "Then we change with it." He stepped past her, headed for the room where the emergency lights still flickered. And though the building hummed with uncertainty, and the future loomed like a shifting storm, one truth settled into him with quiet gravity. He wasn't running from the patterns anymore. He was running toward them. If you want to follow the rest of this journey, make sure to subscribe, and drop a comment with 3 words. Follow the truth.